everybody for being patient as we kick it off with Pascal. Pascal, how's your day going? Do you have video or are you just doing the picture today?
I'm doing a picture today. I have a bad hair week, so I'm gonna stick with the picture that was taken a couple years ago. I can live with that.
All right, great. Cool. Let me just share my screen and we will get started. So thanks everybody for being patient. Depending on where you are, maybe you're eating lunch, maybe it's a coffee in the morning. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity visibility for IT and OT threats. And I'm on with Pascal Ackerman. Switching between tools, I'm looking for the present button. Play. All right, we're good. And so Pascal, thanks for joining on. Patrick with Blumira, VP of Operations, and we're sharing a story of a mutual client that we've worked with in the IT OT space. You know, I think it's been really interesting being able to quickly address some of the needs and challenges that we're going to talk through from an experience perspective. So if you want to kick it off, maybe give a high level in this discussion of what to expect, and then we'll hop right in.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to be here. This is an interesting one. To my knowledge, this is the first time that we engage with a customer where we covered their cybersecurity needs, or their security needs, I should say, for both the IT and the OT space. Because as we all know, throughout history, OT used to be a standalone island of automation. No longer it's just a pile of proprietary technology that combines together some automation devices to create a shielded off island. Basically, more and more we see that the OT space is integrating with IT resources, some done properly, some done not properly, but either way, we see IT presence on the OT side, and we see OT presence on the IT side. We call that convergence, and from now on, the rest of the webinar, I'll be calling the converged IT OT platform ICS, Industrial Control System, because it's all encompassing. Because we've seen this trend, it fits the bill that your tools that monitor and implement cybersecurity should follow the same trend as well. So having visibility on both sides of the equation is a must in our opinion.
We need some more acronyms.
I tend to put them all out in the beginning. So if there's any questions, throw them out in the Q&A. I think looking at the audience, they probably have more insight in all these acronyms than I do. So I don't think they need much explanation, but we can make an appendix at the end of this webinar where we put them all down.
That's great. Yeah, I can think of some other ones we can talk about later too. That sounds really, really good. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about the customer, case study and story that we have here, right? That we were able to mutually help out and provide value to.
Yeah, they've been a long-time customer from us, and we've done some work with them in the past. But they about a year ago, we sat down and we looked at what they had, the state of affairs, and they were really concerned that they didn't have much visibility in the state of affairs around cybersecurity, be it on the IT or the OT side. And as we all know, the fundamental two principles of a cybersecurity program are knowing what you have, and the second one would be knowing what's wrong, or knowing the state of the things that you have. So not being able to accurately know what your asset inventory is at this moment and what's wrong with it or what's going on with it is a fundamental flaw in a security program. So they came to us with that, and we sat down and we brainstormed, and we came up with a solution where we think it was a good fitting implementation.
Yeah, and Pascal, I think in this regard, like working a lot with organizations, not only IT and OT and industrial control environments, but just in general, this is even a problem that's pretty consistent on the IT side. And so I think what's really unique here is the fact that really it's taking a look and actually being able to quickly address both needs and requirements, where a lot of organizations and companies don't even address the IT side of the house either. And so I think that giving that visibility centrally is a huge asset to organizations, just in general.
That's actually a great point. Having the tools, actually, over the past years on both sides, IT, OT, a lot of vendors have implemented fantastic tools that will sit there passively, actively scan the network, detect all kinds of malicious behavior, and report on that. What has been the trend is to give more and more visibility and more reports on this, and not having a good tool to correlate and get this all together. Now expand the problem of having IT and OT assets in your inventory that you have to keep an eye on, and you basically double your field of vision that you need to have to keep an eye on your cybersecurity posture. So having something sitting in the cloud, even having something sitting centrally where you can send all of your event logs and having that analytics be done for you is a very valuable tool.
Yeah, that's great. And we got some comments as we're talking about, can we play buzzword bingo with the acronyms?
If we have time left at the end, we will.
Drink a sip of coffee every time we use one of the words. So cool. And then one other thing was process development and control, PDNC, origin of OT. So I don't have too much context there. You might.
No, I'm drawing a blank on that now for a minute. Process development and control, origin of OT. Yes, origin of OT is basically anything to do with the automation of a factory.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. So in this instance, I think what was interesting is the customer we're working with, they essentially didn't have much of any visibility or detection across security stack, right? And so, yeah, curious to hear from your experience what that was like and what types of things were identified. And you can kind of talk through some of these different bullet points and some of your observations.
Yep.
That'd be awesome.
As I mentioned, ThreatGen had, this has been a customer of ours for a long time. We've done different engagements with them, but at this point, we took on the consultant role and we sat down and we came up with a solution that best fit their needs, which included covering asset management, asset inventory, asset state tracking on both sides of the equation. And as we will talk shortly, we used some Forescout technology to do that on both sides. With that, we needed a solution that could be implemented across the board, across their organization, be it at corporate level or down in the production facilities or below even, because they had islands of automation tucked within enclaves of their industrial environment. So we went all the way across that board and we came up with a solution that detects malicious activities across that entire environment. So.
and help me help the people on the call understand, like, what are the types of assets you're talking about within the IT and OT environment specifically that help to have visibility and monitoring around?
So on the IT side, when I say IT side, I mean on premises. We're talking workstations, we're talking clients, we're talking servers, we're talking network switches, routers, firewalls, and all the typical IT devices that you see on there. On top of that, because we implemented Blumira, we also had a tie into a bunch of cloud services that we could start monitoring as well right out of the box. Really easy setup. On the OT side, you see all of the above. You see all of the IT devices like switches, network gear, servers, workstations. But additionally, not only do we have IT devices, they also go back a couple of decades. So they still have Windows 7, Windows XP machines, and on top of that, we were we were involved in managing assets such as PLCs, HMIs, frequency drives, you name it, DCS equipment, SCADA equipment, and all of the subcategories.
Yeah, and it's pretty often, right? Especially whether it's oil and gas or manufacturing or really any facility with some form of machines and automation to have these different touch points. And I think one of the other things too is like it's easy to shame organizations of how do you have Windows XP within your environment? The reality, especially in the OT side of the house a lot of times, or with manufacturing, is there might not be a clear upgrade path with the equipment that's using or leveraging those platforms, or it can be a tremendous amount of cost to switch them out. So particularly being able to incorporate those things until they do get upgraded becomes a pretty normal thing that I've seen historically speaking. And it sounds like you see pretty often in the OT environment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Because some of this equipment is just it's not, you can't afford to upgrade it. I've heard situations where upgrading one piece of equipment costs $100,000 just so you can go to Windows 7 or Windows 10, and then knowing that you have 10 of them, and then by the time you're done, you're just on Windows 10, and before you know it, that's going to be obsolete because you need Windows 10 20H2 or whatever the latest and greatest is. So that's a never-ending battle. This the full disclosure, this solution doesn't help you secure those legacy systems. They do help you identify them. They do help you figure out the state of affairs. So how badly behind are they on patching? How badly behind are they? And it gives you a chance to start budgeting, to start having discussions, to bring out reports, and to start visualizing a path forward, what you're going to do with those legacy systems, which by itself is a whole different discussion that we probably shouldn't open, we shouldn't open on this webinar.
Yeah. Hey, one thing I will say about that CAN is, a lot of times it's all about hardening any way that you can those devices. So that is something that, like, there are recommendations and resources available. Always best practice is to make sure you're running the latest and greatest. Certainly speaking, that's gonna certainly reduce your risk. And then anytime you have those hosts, isolating them as much as possible. So let's talk a little bit about
one second.
Yep.
I wanted to add to that, just to point out, like what you said is absolutely true. But if you don't know where those systems are, and even with this customer, once we implemented the solution, a lot of these systems came forward. They found Windows XP machines they hadn't seen before. They found devices that they thought were lost. Even found devices sitting at somebody's desk that had left the company a year or two ago. So it was a really eye-opening experience to implement a total visibility solution in a company that before was completely blind to what they had. So. And additionally to this slide, so the challenge was to design a detection and alerting solution that spans the ICS, like we discovered, OT, IT, whatever is implemented. On top of that, they wanted IT specific and cloud coverage as well. But they also wanted little overhead and impact on their own internal resources. So they weren't in a place to add extra staff. They actually did repurpose an employee to help out with this, and he's now a full-time covering manager. He's full-time covering the security asset of it. A fantastic guy. He's really a pleasure to work with, and I think he's going to do great. In a couple of years from now, he's going to tell me how it's all done and how it's all put together. But the idea is for ThreatGen to become mostly hands-off on this, and to train the customer to take over themselves, and then remain on the background in case of really necessary interactions.
Yeah, that's
great.
All. Hey, and we're gonna hop into a little bit more detail, but one question I have too for you is, this customer, we deployed it before we ever started charging or selling, right?
Yep.
I'm curious to get your take on what the experience there was in trying the product, and how much time that involved, and what types of things you guys saw or discovered immediately. Because I think there's certainly some things that are maybe notable from a time perspective, time to value, and then anything that comes to mind. You might not remember, but I was just curious if there's anything there particularly to point out.
So the couple of things that I remember from those discussions was, first of all, they were pleasantly surprised with the low bill of getting on board. That's the deciding factor once they did implement it. But even with the proof of concept that we implemented, it was a really streamlined effort to get this up and running. It didn't take much. We deployed the sensor. We configured the sources to go in, and right away we started seeing people going to the wrong websites, people using outdated credentials, vulnerabilities within operating systems and stuff like that. So right away, within a couple of days, there was a payback on a solution they hadn't even paid for.
Awesome. No, I always encourage people. It's like, hey, just try our product, right? Because it's hard to quantify, because traditionally in the space it takes like 6 months to a year to get value. Is what we see a lot of the times. Whereas our product, like an hour or two's worth of implementation work, you can start getting value out of it, which is particularly important from a deployment perspective. So, yeah, and then one of the things, we didn't have this day one, right? But part of the partnership here and working with the customer was developing integration with Forescout for the OT environment. And so I think even before we started to get Forescout in the service and building detections for it, I think one thing that was notable is we started, building and collecting other things like Windows hosts and firewall logs and things of that nature that surface threats. And then Forescout certainly expanded and complemented the visibility with the solution as well. You want to go into that a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to add that the honeypot functionality is a fantastic tool to have right off the bat as well, which comes with Blumira. So because it sits there, and if anything is scanning or probing your network, the honeypot will be pointing that out. So that's really good. So to go into Forescout, and this by itself could be a 2-hour conversation, but in order to get asset management and IDS on both sides of the ICS, we went with the Forescout solution because they have a dedicated solution for both sides. Where on the IT side, the iSight solution does asset management, it does IDS, it communicates with your switches and firewalls. In case of emergency, they can push out ACLs or firewall rules to actively counteract infiltrations. So that is a completely active solution. It took about a week to deploy that. It's pretty straightforward, and it gives you visibility and access and control over the entire environment. On the OT side, we use another Forescout solution, iInspect, formerly known as Silent Defense. That's a passive tool. So it sits there and it sniffs network traffic. So a full disclosure, it takes a little bit of effort to get that installed properly. The more network traffic that you can pick up, the more visibility you have, the better the tool is. So we spend a significant amount of effort getting a pretty vast spanning infrastructure throughout their facilities, and we're now scanning most of the industrial environment, and it shows people logging in with blacklisted credentials. It shows out of date PLC firmwares. It shows potentially dangerous interactions with automation systems, but also sits there and it looks at dangerous interactions with workstation, for example. If you would use the admin share to download or upload an executable, this will pick that up. And the beauty of it all is the way we've got it set up, an alert will go to the Blumira solution up in the cloud, and there will be analyzed on and forwarded it to the correct people. But your actual data, the proprietary data, the sensitive data behind it stays within the force code solution. So you get an alert, and in order to go to the details of it, you still have to log into your on-premises system, and you still have to get to the force code solution to get to that really sensitive data.
Yeah, and a lot of that, I think, as we talked, is about separating, Blumira being a cloud service, the controls into these systems, and keeping it on premise, while still being able to surface visibility into the threat risk or detection. Is that right?
Yep. Don't forget where we're sitting here. We're talking SCADA, we're talking DCS, we're talking industrial control system with proprietary stuff, with highly sophisticated recipes. You don't want all of that data to come out, and having a solution that just pushes up the alerts and some of the metadata that's necessary to do the analytics in the cloud, but keeping all of that sensitive data on premises is ideal.
Agreed. That's great. And so from building on that, essentially, right, that's tying into Blumira and getting coverage across the IT and OT. We talked a little bit about this, but essentially I think some of the things that we're doing to help provide some light is essentially aggregating, parsing, and detecting and correlating threats, and then helping prioritize them, and provide reporting and threat response, pretty much end to end with the integrations that we build. And we can expand on that a little bit more. But yeah, any thoughts in those areas or these areas as it relates to the tie into Blumira?
All I'm going to say, where were you guys all these years? Because, like I said, I've implemented a lot of IDS solutions throughout, and a lot of solutions that generate events. I've never found a really fitting SIEM solution that could cover all of it. So again, having something sit in the cloud where people interact with in the cloud, so you have somebody at corporate doesn't have to necessarily go and log into an industrial system to get these reports. Having something in the cloud that alerts, that correlates, that you can run reports off of, it's just ideal. And then having that separation with the ICS environment where you keep your sensitive data on premises, hidden away from the public eye, but still can alert even if somebody is on vacation in Hawaii, because you have this cloud presence, is just ideal. Really quick, yeah. Because I saw a chat message from Daniel. I agree. IDS has no place on the OT side. IPS is mainly aimed at the IT side of things. So force codes, iInsight can talk to switches and can actively start blocking stuff. Keep that away from the OT, because you don't all of a sudden want to interrupt the process because somebody is scanning or we interpret something as a scan.
Yeah, that's a great answer there. One of the reasons I came to Blumira a little over a year ago, and some of the reason why I'm here are the things that you mentioned. Everyone asked me, they're like, why would you want to go into this market where there's 20 different vendors and they all suck? No, I say, like, literally people ask me that, right? And they don't all suck. They all require a PhD or require a lot of customization. And I think the challenge is like what gets in the way of success with most of the products that are out there, that have been out there, is that it does require a high level of sophistication and a lot of time to get what's needed. And so when you take on IT and then you use that product and then you stack on OT, the next thing you know is like you need a team of like 15 people to operationalize it. And I think that's one of the things that was exciting to me is at Blumira was focusing more on purpose-built integration and end-to-end detection that's high fidelity, opposed to let's just surface everything and anything, so that people can actually move the needle, give value, and detect real threats as they're actively happening. Where I think traditionally, like it's been more about let's just kick off a lot of noise and then have people funnel through and figure out what's important. And so that approach is essentially what it has allowed us to get to a deployment of a couple of hours and able to surface real high risk, but not overwhelm the IT teams or the OT teams in this regard. From a time perspective, and get them the high fidelity security detections. So
I fully agree. And this is why this works so well in the industrial space, because we're engineers, we're controls folks. We really don't necessarily care about security. We want to do our product. We want to get it out the door as efficiently as possible. And security is just a necessary evil of doing this kind of business. So you'll not find a lot of companies, and I'm not talking about the big companies who have the big funds, but you won't find a lot of companies who can dedicate a whole team of analysts just to figure out how Splunk works. Where Blumira comes in really strong is that we send up the event and you do the analytics, you do the thinking for us, and then you send out an alert. Now, what we bring to the table as ThreatGen, we leave behind a secondary way of looking at these logs. Let's say there is something that we want to deep dive into that happened on the industrial side. We still have an ELK-based, an Elasticsearch-based solution that has been monitoring all of this data on the background as well. So if you want to go really deep into logs that are specific, that have proprietary data, there is something sitting on the industrial side as well to do that. So even for the data junkies out there, we still have the tools and we still have the data out there to play with.
Hey, and that's a perfect example. It's like Elk Stack's a great product. It's great for collection. And when you want to dive into that stuff, right, from a research perspective. And I think that's exactly the example of like, same thing. Splunk is kind of in that space of like collection, research analytics side of things. I know, and I think in OT it's specifically important here that that's separate. But on the IT side, that's some of what we have, and then continue to build into as well, which is helpful for people to know from an approach perspective. So this is good. Any other last things before we hop into the product, so I can give a quick demo overview of how the Blumira product works.
So because this is the conclusion, so right now our customer has full visibility in their ICS and additionally fully IT focused security posture. At the moment, ThreatGen is engaged with them as their MSSP, managed security services provider. So we do training. We hope to train them to the point where they can take completely control, they take over completely the day-to-day efforts around this. But that's right. We are there to be their liaison in all things cybersecurity related. So we want them to be successful in whatever way and shape it is necessary.
Yep, that's what I think. One of the things I think is great here, and strategically from a delivery perspective, managed service providers like yourself are awesome, because essentially like you have the expertise of the customer in which you're addressing, which is OT, really, really well to do broad support and coverage and project-based things that there's always a need for. But what's cool there, and I can show this too, is like with Blumira, it's that balance of you being able to co-manage with your customer and you being that managed service provider, and basically having the flexibility to push down either way, of like you being the resource that's doing it all, or the customer doing some of it or doing all of it, which is really, really beneficial. And what I find a lot of tools that are MSP focused is it would give you visibility, but the customer wouldn't have any visibility, right? And there's a bit of disconnect that customers then end up being like, well, hey, I still want some level of visibility or control. So I think in these use cases, it's particularly important and works really, really well, is what I've seen. So
I just wanted to conclude that now that we've now that we generated the visibility across the board, now we know what we have. We also see what is wrong with what we have. So it's an ongoing battle, and it's a never-ending cycle of improvement. So now that we know what we need to address, that's where we come into play as well. We help them mitigate stuff. We help them find the risk and address the risk that we're discovering because of this solution. Like I said in the beginning, this is not a solution to protect and control and prevent every single breach, but it does show us where we need to put our efforts at.
Hey, and one good example on the value of scale with Blumira being a SaaS service and having a lot of clients is like this past week with the Exchange vulnerability that happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like most organizations still, a lot of them don't even know what's going on or what to do, right? I think it's pretty powerful that like immediately we saw the vulnerability come out, made recommendations and notified our customers, and then analyzed all the ones that we saw based on logs were possibly impacted with remediation steps of, hey, you should update this. And then we've already got monitoring stuff in place across full customers to be able to detect and continue to monitor what's vulnerable. And then also what attacks are being used within the customers that have been compromised. Because the reality is like this attack has moved so fast, right? And so the reality is like of all the organizations that are our customers, I'll be honest, if they had a different solution, they wouldn't even have anything in place to be able to get detection. Whereas because we're doing it aggregate on behalf of the customers, we do it so quick and move quick. And I've seen that time and time again with SolarWinds, with the Exchange stuff, with any of these new things coming out. So wanted to just highlight like that the ability for us to react and address the market security needs as they happen in real time is extremely high, which is pretty exciting. So
great point. Can I add really quick? If you scroll back to the last slide, there's this snippet, the alert, the alert email on the right side that says Forescout high severity alert. The little cutoff of this alert. But not only are we sending the alert, and this is an OT alert, but on the IT side as well. Not only do we send the alert identifying the threat, there's also a section in here that says what to do to mitigate this or what next steps. So there's recommendations within these emails right away. So that's really powerful as well. And like I said, that spans the IT. Somebody's going to the wrong website, block their access, for example. Or on the OT side, somebody's using blacklisted credentials. Start looking at replacing these credentials, but it gives you the information where to look, where to go, and what to do.
Great. Thanks so much. So yeah, some of the, I'm going to hop into some of the things that first we look for. So, high level, first off, is most IT and OT attacks are common known vulnerabilities or techniques and tactics that are being used. And I'm not going to discount that occasionally there are APT or other tactics, but the reality is even when those are being used, common tactics are still being used with them. And so this is a list of some of the high level, there's a laundry list, a big amount of things that we detect for across the MITRE attack framework. But some of the more common things just to surface are internal recon scanning, right? And you mentioned the honeypots earlier. Just having a honeypot or two within your OT environment now gives you visibility at who's trying to scan and look for places to get access. And what I would say is kind of like what you mentioned, segmentation isn't something that you commonly necessarily see in an OT environment. I think sometimes you have like a SCADA network and some other things, but like true zero trust type of segmentation is uncommon because of the risk it brings to the operational side. Is that right?
Unfortunately, we're not seeing as much segmentation as we wanted to, but
That's okay.
We did tackle that, and we put segmentation with this customer to do this, and that's a good point. We're talking Blumira sensors sitting behind those segmentations, so we're working through a DMZ and an IDMZ to get all of this out to the public network.
Yeah, and then some of the other things are like as simple as like new account admins being created. Late stage ransomware attack, a lot of times that happens in Active Directory. Data exfiltration that can be detected via things like firewall or drive sharing. Misconfigurations is a common one. RDP or SMB exposure on the internet that shouldn't be. And especially as you look at OT systems, like that can be surprising sometimes when people don't realize it's not behind a proxy of some sort or has access to the internet, right?
But
and then
yep. Was there a question?
Oh, I was just asking for confirmation. It's all right.
No. So ideally, we have no access to the internet whatsoever. Be it maybe one or two systems that pull updates on behalf of the rest of the OT environment, but typically a workstation, a PLC, an HMI, that's a big no-no.
Yep. And then some of the other things are access attempts. So like password spraying on the gateway to get into the OT or IT environments. You should always have multi-factor authentication, but still getting access to these early stage attacks allows you to prevent or stop them. And I'll walk through what some of that looks like in a sec with Blumira, because we are a preventative control in that regard. And so I'm going to hop in just a moment. How the product actually works is we purposely build integration within a customer's environment, and we automate on the front end ingestion, parsing, threat intel, detection rules, alerting, prioritization, reporting, and then essentially detect threats if it can be automated, taking action in the case of next-gen firewalls, which I'll show. And then if not, providing that playbook on what to do from a response perspective. That's human readable and just requires basic IT skills, not necessarily deep security expertise. I think as it relates to alerting on the OT side, that's where it comes in. You're going to need some level of knowledge on the OT side to be able to know what to do there. And certainly in all this, I think there's a combination of having a partner like you guys, ThreatGen allows you to offload management and allow someone with the expertise to be able to take action and do these things when necessary. And we integrate across the stack. I know I should have put Forescout in here for this demo, but yeah, it ranges from cloud infrastructure, Office 365, productivity suites, your endpoint EDR technology, including things like Windows Defender, to the hosts. And the host side, we did a lot of that work, or have done a lot of that work on the OT side, even where you have Windows types of servers, and then your firewalls. And being able to ingest all these different points essentially allows us to detect many different common techniques, tactics, and threats within a customer's environment. So I'm gonna hop to product and give a quick demo. Before I do this, I'm gonna, because some other people might be in the account, reset and just show really quickly. So first thing I mentioned is time to security, getting deployed fast and quick. And so we have a sensor. In this sensor combination, it's a Ubuntu host, and then that forwards the logs or alerts to Blumira service, which is in the cloud. And if we look at that sensor, essentially, it can receive traffic via syslog, firewalls and Windows hosts. And then you can add additional modules. So I could select a honeypot, for example, and install that module with a click of a button. Sorry, we have too many honeypots in our demo created, but simply that would spin up a honeypot on the sensor itself. And then you can integrate with things like Umbrella in Office 365. So you're getting detection across an environment just by putting the API keys in. So normal integration takes about, once you have the sensor up and running, usually about half an hour to an hour. And then once those logs are ingested, essentially we'll start surfacing and detecting threats. In some cases, it might take a little bit of time before something surfaces, because there might not be an immediate threat that's detected, right? And the idea isn't just to spray a ton of information that's useless. And I think a lot of people are surprised about that, because that's usually what happens when you turn on a traditional SIEM. But I can walk through some different examples here that are applicable and what types of things we're gonna surface, right? So Pascal, what are you thinking? Password spraying on a VPN sound like a good one to walk through?
That might be, unless you have something that says Team Viewer. I think this is close enough.
Yeah, so in this instance, what we can see here is I'm going to assign myself as a responder. Blumira has detected password spraying via these IP addresses. And even if you have two-factor, right, like the joy here is I have the IP addresses listed, and I can block the source of the attack. And so if I'm using a next-gen firewall like an ASA or Cisco FTD or a Palo Alto or Checkpoint, I can just click this button and it blocks the attack automatically. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's great. Why can't I just have it do it itself? Well, you can. So I can click automate, and that automates blocking when it detects things like password spraying through the dynamic block list. So that it becomes a preventative control. And then we also have a preventative capability that applies threat feeds to the firewall for blocking too. So that you don't have to do anything. Like it's pretty much, drives itself. And then we have a community feature, which takes things we learned from other customers and applies them across all customers, as well from a blocking perspective. So some really easy, measures that can be taken from a prevention and detection standpoint. And then, taking it a bit beyond there, some of the honeypot access are examples, but like here's one where we're taking actual information out of Active Directory. So in this instance, new accounts are being spun up that are domain admin. And so you would want to validate if you did that for business purposes, because a lot of times that's late stage ransomware attack that's happening. And so in this instance, I could mark, hey, we're unaware, and close out the finding. And then what that's going to do is essentially open a new ticket up and send a notification via priority voice, text, or email, for examples here. And what we can see now in the responder view is now I have a rogue domain account administrator. And this actually gives you instructions on PowerShell to disable this account, for example. And one of the joys is you can also interact with the Blumira team via the chat box. So you can communicate, hey, maybe something happens to be, you need more clarity, or maybe you need something whitelisted that's coming up. That's an interaction directly with our security analyst team when you need that additional information. And that also helps us to reiterate the product. So it works both fold from an interaction perspective with customers. So pretty, pretty straightforward. Any other observations you have? I can hop into a few additional threads or other things you might think people will find interesting.
I'm just thinking we need to put some real life OT alerts into your lab, because I got some going on here, but we need to make sure we integrate them into this presentation.
Yeah, no, that's good. I can take the action on that one, which is great. I do think on the Windows side, like the detection that I just showed, like that is something that also would come out of OT environment, not necessarily with Forescout per se. And then if I scroll down, some other ones, like we talked about RDP connections on the internet. And one thing I would say here is like we can monitor for public IPs connecting inward, really via any ports, but we do that specifically on things like RDP and SMB and SSH that like should never be exposed to the internet per se. and providing that recommendation of, hey, these should be behind a VPN in order to gain access, regardless of OT or IT, right? So that's the type of things that are available out of the box with the Blumira tool.
Which actually really good lead in to something that we need to point out, is that attacks on modern ICS environments often start on the enterprise side. So often this would be the very first alert you would see. Somebody logging in successfully or unsuccessfully to an RDP session. And from there, they manage to maneuver through the enterprise network, somehow find a loophole into the industrial environment and start causing mayhem down there.
Yep.
Other times you'll see the opposite. You'll see that a force scout will detect a modification to one of the control systems or the workstations, and you have the means now to tie that back. You're like, hey, where did this come from? Okay, we're going to look at our logs. It came from a remote desktop session that went through our DMZ that came from the enterprise. Then you go from there. Okay, who connected to that system around that time, and you can find that it was either somebody internally or maybe even somebody on the internet that managed to get a foothold on that system on the enterprise side. But in the long story short, having the visibility to trace this back from OT across the enterprise and into the public space is a valuable tool, and I think it's necessary, because we've seen this convergence trend just become more and more proliferant. More and more companies will have some sort of an OT presence on the IT side, and this is to your comment, Daniel, that you the question you asked in the beginning. Yeah, ideally we do not converge IT and OT environments, but it's happening. It's going to happen. It's going to get worse. We need to be in a place where we do it properly and where we do it securely.
Yeah, the other convergence. So you have IT and OT, right? And especially in this environment, most of those things had been on premise, but IT is moving a lot of services to the cloud, even in these industrial control environments. And so you do also have the mix of like Office 365, and that's an example of one of the first places attackers a lot of times try and get. And they'll start with password spraying, they'll get access to the inbox, and then they'll start spinning up new rules like, hey, I'm going to forward all the email from this inbox. Now I'm exfiltrating data and I'm using that information. And I can tell you, just in the past 2 weeks, I've seen 3 different wire transfers successful because they get access to the data. And then essentially they use that information learning to send information at the right time from these inboxes that looks legit and it's coming from the right addresses. And then other people wire money accordingly because they don't get verbal confirmations. And so there are a combination of tactics being used to be able to exploit on all different angles, from cloud to the IT infrastructure to the OT infrastructure that intertwine. So it's pretty wild to the extent of where the attacks come from, but for the most part, they're not sophisticated attacks. They're just taking advantage of the fact that they're sprawl, and these systems are not well fortified. Is probably the biggest observations that we see time and time again. Hopefully that's helpful for everyone to hear. It's blocking and tackling and getting the basics covered are probably the most critical thing.
Yep.
Cool. I showed a lot there. One thing I would and we've talked a lot there. One thing I would emphasize is just a combination. So first off, on the ThreatGen side, Pascal, what's the best way for organizations to engage, and how do you guys typically initially start working with organizations?
You can find us at ThreatGen.com. Send us an email. My contact information is out there. You can reach me on LinkedIn as well, and that way we can get the ball rolling.
Cool. And then on the Blumira side, probably the biggest call to action I would say, in conjunction with ThreatGen, is reach out to ThreatGen and us, and we can kick up a trial same day if you want to try the product. and see the value pretty quickly from a time perspective. That's usually the best way to quantify. And a lot of times too, as you kind of mentioned, that initial test, a lot of times in itself justifies going to leadership and asking for money, because you're able to surface and find real things that you didn't know about, and show the value immediately to leadership. So, I would just say from a budgetary standpoint and from a planning standpoint, if you're struggling with, hey, how do I ask for more money to spend on things like this, in working with us in ThreatGen, one of the great ways is just to actually deploy the product and be able to share the information that comes out of it. Because so many times, there's things that just left people wide open, that we're able to surface and quantify the reduction in risk there. And Pascal, I think you guys have seen that as well, correct?
Yes, a lot of times once you implement any type of solution that gives you visibility in your environment, it's going to show up the low-hanging fruit, and then you have some ammunition to take up to management and ask for additional funding. Or maybe you're the one lucky customer that has nothing going on and says, hey, this tool is now working.
Absolutely. Hey, and then so call to action, engage us. The other thing this is more of a joke, but acronyms, NFTs. Do you see that the industrial control system starting to get into blockchain and NFTs?
No, I gotta look that one up, but it just sounds hilarious. Blockchain and OT. That's probably the solution to secure it all. Blockchain.
It's I think it's kind of interesting, but more of a joke on my part. So yeah, thanks. I don't know if anybody has any questions on. We have a few more minutes, right? So if there's any additional questions or comments, happy to talk through or address them. We've had a great crew and engaging. Appreciate everyone for kind of hopping on and listening to how we've been able to help partnership wise between ThreatGen and Blumira customers in the IT, OT, ICS space. So this has been great.
Thanks for being here with us, and hopefully talk to you soon.
All right, take care, everybody.
We offline?
Oh, there's still people on.